Welcome to the Week in Italian Startup, where we discuss the latest highlights happening in the Italian tech and investment ecosystem. We have here two amazing guests, Umberto and Gian, and I'll let them introduce themselves later on. Today's topic is about how exactly Switzerland is moving in terms of startup ecosystem, investing, stages of investments, and so on and so forth. So let me hand over the word to Umberto and Gian to introduce themselves, and then we go straight into the discussion. Yep. So welcome, guys.
Thanks a lot, Giacomo, for having us tonight. Very briefly on myself, I'm of course Italian, but I moved here to Switzerland. It's now about 4 years ago, and I'm qualified lawyer both in Italy and here in Switzerland. I work mostly on corporate topics with a focus in particular on startups and VC investments. I'm an associate at Keller Ascarard. It's one of the biggest law firms in Switzerland with seats in all the main cities, and with a startup desk that counts 15 lawyers, more or less, that focus exclusively on startup related matter, and then a lot of other lawyers that are involved on a case-by-case basis, depending on the expertise that is needed in connection with this topic.
Thank you, Umberto. Taking over now. So my name is Gian, currently working as a venture capital business development manager for AWS, where I'm responsible for the Swiss startup market. Before that, I worked several years in a VC company, also originally from Italy. I started my career in a small clean tech startup, but then moved to Germany and then to Switzerland.
Awesome. So thank you, guys. Let's go in. Let's talk about funding rounds between Italy and Switzerland. Talking with Umberto, I was shocked to apprehend that the market was so big, and it was very, very surprising. I'm not particularly keen on knowing what's happening in your ecosystem, so I'm definitely interested in seeing what you guys have discovered, found out, and what you actually are living right now. So let's start from there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that the goal of this session tonight is also to highlight the connections that exist between the Italian and the Swiss ecosystem. And as you rightly point out, to get the feeling of where the two ecosystems stand, it's important to have an idea of the Switzerland. We have figures that are quite fresh because they come out of the VC report that was published just a few days ago. In Switzerland last year, 2021, more than 3 billion of Swiss francs were invested in startups, which accounts for approximately 2.9 billion euros. Whereas in Italy, based on the figures that I gathered online, this was 1.6, 1.7, something like that. And this is particularly remarkable, not only because it's almost double, but this also has to put in relation with the size of the two countries in terms of population and GDP. I mean, Switzerland has 8 million inhabitants, more or less, which is less than the Lombardy region alone. So yeah. If we take into account these metrics, it's quite impressive how Switzerland performs well as compared to Italy in these matters in startups. John, I'll let you compliment if you have additional thoughts on this topic.
No, I think it's always right to put it in perspective, right? So normally I always say it's not the right way to compare Italy with Switzerland because of the reasons that Umberto just mentioned. So if you compare Italy, we should compare it to France, to Germany, and then last year there were like Germany at 18 billion, France at 11. So you already see it's more than 10x difference, which is really huge, right? And it takes time to build ecosystems, but we need to move. I mean, Italy, I think, is growing, so that's the positive fact. But then it really needs to accelerate, right?
Yeah. Also, because from what I was also hearing from Francesco Cerruti, he's the managing director of Italian Tech Alliance, all the other macroeconomic parameters are actually in good shape as compared to France and other big countries in Europe. So there is definitely a potential for Italy to make this leap ahead in catching up with other ecosystems, but definitely things need to get going.
Right. So let's talk about verticals then, and let's dive into Switzerland as the deep tech country, and how you guys are seeing the different trends. Where is it going, and how is it moving? I've seen from the Deal Room report that there is a lot, of course, of health tech and fintech as sort of the major big movers in terms of verticals, but deep tech in general is also taking shape and moving very fast. So let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah, I think what I would like to mention is that Switzerland is a very B2B focused market across all the verticals, right? As you already mentioned, biotech, medtechs are leading the way, so they made more than 50% of the total money raised. But I think there is a new wave of B2B digital companies, could be ICT, SaaS, fintech coming up, which means that these companies are gaining always more importance. So on one side, it's important, right? Because then you can build truly scalable companies that can scale worldwide. While biotech and medtech normally are then acquired by larger players. So I think it's a bit different games, and it will also lift the ecosystem to a global level.
Awesome.
Yeah, another thought maybe that I have in this respect is that besides the individual verticals, it's important to know that really in Switzerland what is predominant is deep tech. Meaning highly technological ventures that are built based on university research. Irrespective of then the individual domain of activity, it may be life sciences, may be engineering, it may be ICT and so forth. But what is a common trait is often the fact that Swiss startups rely on a very strong academic backdrop. And this is often due to the excellences that are here in Switzerland in terms of universities or research centers. And just to name a few is the ETH, of course. It's a very reputed university. It ranks among the best universities for engineering in international rankings every year. And same goes for EPFL in Lausanne. And another one, for instance, is the PSI. Which is another big research center. Also the CERN in Geneva has been recently spinning off some interesting startups. So the common trait of all these ventures is really the fact of having a strong academic research behind them.
Yeah, I was reading an article on Financial Times, which actually came out a few days ago, talking about the European VCs and how basically everything is moving. And exactly the ETH Institute was actually put together with Oxford and Cambridge in terms of some of the top research institutions in Europe that are actually moving very fast to help building new businesses and so on. The question I have to you though is that there is a lot of talk here in Italy about technology transfer. That's what we call it here, and it's kind of it's not well defined. I feel, and sometimes is a little bit unsuccessful. So it's tough actually to bridge the gap between university and entrepreneurship. So I was wondering if you guys can tell us, what do you see working really well that actually bridges the gap between research centers and launching a startup that is working really, really well?
So maybe it's also important to mention a few numbers, right? So for instance, in 2020, ETH and EPFL Lausanne, they spun out together 59 companies. Only 2 universities, right? I don't have the number for Italy. I tried to look for the number before the call, but I couldn't find it. But I would like to see the numbers in Italy. How many companies are created on a yearly basis from the universities? And then you can compare the numbers, right? But like 59 between two institutes in 1 year. It's a great number.
Yeah, and perhaps an additional consideration on this, you mentioned Cambridge and Oxford, and these are very well known also for the efficiency of their technology transfer offices that, for what I know, in Anglo-Saxon countries, they work really on a for-profit basis, which helps putting things in perspective, in the sense that really there is really this commercial approach to technology transfer, which is not often seen in Italy, in my view. I mean, it's not necessarily a good or bad thing, but I think it's important in order for the research to arrive finally on the market, that there are processes in place, first of all, and also vision behind that. Because I mean, in the end, we are speaking about public money that is being spent in research, which may yield ultimately to private profits. You know, the founders that ultimately benefit from this technology that has been developed as part of their studies at university. So to cover that, technology transfer offices in Switzerland, and as far as I know, also in the UK, for instance, are quite sophisticated in the way they determine the stake that they want from startups in terms of equity when they grant an exclusive license on the IP that has been developed within the university, or exactly, again, the license fee, the royalties that are paid on the use of such IP. So these are considerations that need to be made. Not sure about the status in Italy on that, but I was speaking with a researcher in Catania, and he was telling me that he developed a great technology that had a big potential on the market. The university was very keen in Catania to allow him to basically take this IP for free. So not even caring too much about the commercial terms that it could have negotiated with him, but they could not gather the person that was competent for signing this piece of paper whereby the IP was to be transferred. So that's perhaps an extreme scenario. I'm pretty sure that the Polytechnic of Milan or other universities are much better organized. But yeah, I mean, it's quite paradoxical if you think about it.
So it's a strong sense of how to actually, well, from the university side, on how to capitalize on intellectual property being built in university, plus, yes, some form of like equity sort of like involvement. And how are university, I'm wondering, like helping out this project to access capital, especially early stage capital, or even, you know, corporate partners that can actually benefit from this technology? What's the dynamic right there?
Yeah, so there are grants programs. So I know like there is a famous program called Pioneer Fellowship, where startups, I mean projects at ETH can receive the first grants. So I think more than 100K, and then they can, of course, have access to all facilities and labs for a certain time. So it's key for an early stage companies based on deep tech. If you don't have access to those resources and labs, then I mean you could just die the day after you go out of the university, right? And then I think all the networks surrounding those institutes, because those, as Umberto mentioned, are really excellent institutes, and basically there is a whole ecosystem surrounding them. So startup founders here really can go out of the university, talk to many people, get feedback, mentoring, talk to former investors. So I would say the ecosystem is very open, and many people are there to support entrepreneurs.
So
I think it's
sorry, go ahead, Umberto.
Yeah, sorry. I think it's also a matter of branding. I mean, these research institutes are open to grant ETH spin-off label that can be used by startups that were incubated, let's say, on their premises, and that helps a lot those startups in raising funds from investors. Because statistically speaking, ETH spin-offs, for instance, are very successful because they have a very strong IP that they can boast, and I think the success rate is 95% have not gone bankrupt after 5 years.
Wow.
So it's a very high success rate as compared to average startups, which of course makes it easier for them if they can boast this ETH spin-off label to raise additional funds.
Awesome. So another factor that you were mentioning during our conversation was the high level of sort of education of startup founders. So coming from a doctorate background or some very solid academic background. So let's talk about how that is actually affecting the ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, it's a direct consequence of what we were discussing before, that many of the startups come out of university research and in particular doctoral programs. So that's why a lot of startup founders are typically very well educated. They have a master's degree or above, a doctoral degree typically, which then again increases their chances of success, especially in a market here in Switzerland where there is a high consideration for these kind of academic titles. So that also helps in relationships with investors and with other stakeholders.
Awesome. So let's talk about expats and how international Switzerland is and has always been, and how that specific trait has affected the ecosystem in the development of successful businesses.
There are some interesting numbers. I can drop one, and then I think Umberto also has more information. But like, there was a recent study saying that in the canton of Zurich, so in the region of Zurich, 76% of the startup founders are not Swiss people. 76%, it's a high number, right? And I think this is again related to the fact that ETH or EPFL are able to attract international talents. And then it's also a cultural aspect, because these international talents, they might be more willing to take risks, and then they spin out the company, they create companies. I mean, the opportunity cost in Switzerland to create a startup or go work for a large corporates are very high. And you really need to believe in your idea and basically in your research to work on it and bring it to the next levels. So it's
Yeah, it's interesting also to see again with a view to highlight the ties to the Italian ecosystem. How many Italian founders do we have in Switzerland? And based on like sort of very high level research that me and John made, it's approximately 10% of all the founders of Swiss startups. I mean, there is this very well-known prize that is awarded every year, which is called Top 100 Swiss Startups, which is exactly what it purports to be. So to prize the top 100 Swiss startups. And out of those last year, I think 9 were founded by Italians. So, and that's probably a good proxy of the overall market. Also looking at the amount of spin-offs that come out every year from ETH, from EPFL, that's probably a good proxy of the overall deep tech startups that are out there on the market.
Awesome. So I think there is also two consideration, which I'm wondering how you guys think about those. So it looks like founders from all over the world are sort of incentivized to stay in Switzerland and not go back to their home countries or move away. So once the dynamic have been triggered, then they want to stay and flourish in that specific area. So how that dynamic works?
Yeah, probably it's key to mention that Switzerland is a place where startup founders can find talent. So you have access to talents, and it's one reason to stay. And then most important, and here I'm quoting a CEO, he was telling me that basically for him, it was not a problem to find the first angel money or the seed rounds. And I think this is a bit a general aspect among Swiss startups, that getting to the angel seed rounds, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's doable, right? And then from there you start building, and it means that you have less obstacle to start and you can take the risk. So I think these are key aspects to get started.
Awesome. So another curiosity is that some people claim that actually it's the ecosystem is a bit tight because a big corp in Switzerland are actually offering great pay, so great talent. Instead of launching their own project, they would rather work for big companies. So it's always this kind of tension. How do you guys feel that's if that's the case, or if it's changing, or still like that, or what's the situation?
My view is that also corporates are approaching more and more the startup ecosystem. I mean, you see corporates that are more and more involved in corporate venture capital. So that's also a way that the two things are, let's say, bridged on the one hand. And on the other hand, they are also involved in spin-offs that come out directly from internal innovation projects that they want to release on the market in a different way. So that's one tie. But then on the other hand, to probably respond more directly to your question, as John was mentioning already, there is a huge opportunity cost here in Switzerland, because as a startup founder, you would pay yourself likely for the first years of your work a very low salary as compared to what you would get at a large company corporation here in Switzerland. So of course that's something to be kept in mind. On the other hand, the ecosystem is well established, and there are ways that allow you to survive, or at least that gives you hope.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Awesome. All right. Since you guys you're supporting in the first person the whole ecosystem with your initiative, let's talk about what you guys are organizing. I know there is also an event coming up that you guys are pushing, so let's talk about that.
Yeah, thanks. So we spoke already about the huge number of Italian founders that we have here in Switzerland, and so John and I basically started to counting them first, and then to rally them together in this network that we have built and which we called Pizzatech. And by now we count approximately 60 founders in our network, 65. And yeah, I mean, it's a very informal and open network. It's mostly meant to share experiences among founders, to try to extend each other's network by introductions with investors, with executives, in case it's needed, March 24th this year, here in Zurich, at Schlieren, at the startup space, which is made available by Venture Lab, which is one of the main organization in the Swiss startup field. And yeah, we will be welcoming any Italian player coming from Italy for the purpose. There will be the managing director of Italian Tech Alliance that will be coming up speaking in the panel that will be held there. So it will be a great opportunity to highlight ties and connections between the Swiss and Italian ecosystem, which are a lot, definitely, on all from all points of view, because it's not a matter only of Italian startups in Switzerland, but then what it means to be an Italian founder in Switzerland. And of course, you bring with yourself all the background that you have, being born and raised in Italy, and it goes along with connections that one has with investors. For instance, it's quite difficult to see Swiss startup founded by Italians that are backed by Italian VCs. That happens quite often, but also in terms of then exit opportunities. And Italy is looking more and more to Switzerland when it comes to the acquisition of businesses. There have been 4 large exits last year that were realized by Swiss startups acquired by Italian industrial groups mainly. So there are definitely connections between the two countries that need to be highlighted more. So that's a little bit our purpose with the Pizzatech initiative.
And also this year, one of the first exits was made. I mean, one Swiss company was acquired by an Italian conglomerate. So you see that there are always more these kind of engagements and opportunities.
Fantastic.
Which also, again, to me, it's a sign of hope for the Italian ecosystem, because it means that Italian conglomerates are looking at startups as a source for internal innovation, which on one hand could boost, of course, the local ecosystem, because it could push companies to do better with the hope that sooner or later they will be noticed by one of these groups. So it's a good sign for sure.
Fantastic. So let's talk about Geographies and how exactly the different spread of startup is in Switzerland in general. And I wanted to have your opinion about what are the different hubs that and how they are characterized in particular. So Zurich is kind of the capital of the startup world in Switzerland. Then I've read something about Crypto Valley and so on and so forth. So help us think through that.
Yeah, local hubs here in Switzerland, definitely Zurich is one, and the reason is very easy to explain. It's because of ETH and what we were saying previously around that, and the same goes for Lausanne with the EPFL. So it's really because of these universities which are centers for applied sciences, which is why then this creates technologies that is brought to the market. The University of Zurich, for instance, which is not in the field of engineering, of pharma, etc., it has some spin-offs, but the number of spin-offs that come out of it every year is much lower, as you can imagine, because it's not applied sciences. So definitely around these research centers, a lot of spin-offs come out and a lot of startups come out. Then, as you rightly said, it's Zug, the Crypto Valley. So there you have a focus on cryptocurrencies and crypto-related activities, which was boosted already in 2017 because the local regulator, FINMA, was one of the first in issuing guidelines that could be used from investors for purposes of giving a sort of legal framework on how these issues were regulated, and therefore it attracted a lot of foreign projects also that decided to launch from Switzerland because of these regulatory easiness, if you wish. And now this has even been strengthened with the recent law that has been passed, which basically governs the issuance of tokenized shares. So shares of a Swiss corporation can be issued now not only in the form of share certificates in paper, or in the case of uncertificated securities, basically just shares that are kept in the company's register but not issued physically, but also in the form of tokens, which of course has a great impact when it comes to the secondary market, because tokens, the whole purpose of having a tokenized share is that it is easily tradable. So that again has boosted crypto activity, especially in Zug, which has become one of the main hubs in that respect. And then I would at least mention Basel, which is the seat of many of the biggest pharma companies in the world, Novartis, Roche, to name a few, and therefore it has a strong foothold also in respect of startups that are active in the life sciences field.
Fantastic. I want to dig deeper into the tokenization part. I don't know how exactly. So basically, any company can decide whether to issue equity in form of shares or in form of tokens, or both. Are they the same thing, like legally? I mean, I'm really curious on how this works, like precisely. Just a few minutes on that, and then we move on.
Sure. Happy to do so. Yeah, legally speaking, they have the same validity as traditional shares.
Okay.
But for the time being, there are very few companies that have actually proceeded with the tokenization of shares, because, as I mentioned already, the whole purpose of doing this is to have liquid shares that then can be traded on a secondary market. And that's a different story in the sense that to operate a secondary market that trades tokens or tokenized shares, you still need like sort of regular license from FINMA. And with the same law, they introduced a new kind of license that is typically tailored for, let's say, crypto exchanges, and not traditional ones, for which the requirements from a regulatory perspective are a little bit less stringent than the traditional ones that are required for stock exchanges, for instance, but still they're quite heavy. So it's not easy to do so. And for the time being, there are no such markets that operate on a regular basis. I mean, SIX has obtained, which is the Swiss Stock Exchange, has obtained already a license to do so, but to my knowledge, that hasn't really started yet in its operations. So for the time being, also the issuance of these tokenized shares has been quite marginal, but I really believe that it's just a matter of time. So as soon as there will be platforms on which tokens can be traded, it will be much more attractive for also small companies, just startups, to issue tokenized shares to improve their chances of fundraising.
I agree. Definitely a huge potential right there. Let's talk about the different stages then of funding rounds in general in Switzerland, starting from maybe crowdfunding and what's your perspective on crowdfunding, and then we can move maybe to angel network and then later VCs and so on and so forth. So let's do a little trip over there.
Yeah. Okay. Crowdfunding is almost not on the radar of Swiss investors. So there are strong networks of business angels that cover the need for very early stage financing for startups, and they typically do not resort to crowdfunding. I think that the reason is, as I said already, the availability of alternatives, such as business angels, that have the advantage of not blowing up the cap table, for instance, as is the case of crowdfunding. It's simply not very attractive here in Switzerland.
Let's talk about angel groups then. We talk about pre-seed and seed stage. So we probably see a spectrum of angel group, entrepreneurs, former startup founders, and maybe some micro funds, I would say. So what is the situation over there for the beginning of finance, I would say?
Yeah, there are some good networks. As I said, SICTIC, for instance, is one of the biggest ones. Just to name it, and they operate as I believe all these networks do. So basically, they make a pre-screening of the startups that are then presented to the larger group of business angels, and then each business angel takes the decision of investing or not individually. There is perhaps one big exception to this rule, which is a network called Investire, formerly, and now it's called Verve Ventures. And basically, that's like a sort of crowdfunding, perhaps the only one that works here in Switzerland. So it's a network, again, of high net worth individuals, but anybody can sign up on their platform. And they select investment opportunities, which then present to their network. And once they have done so, they fundraise internally before they can take their commitment toward the startup. So that's a different way of doing it. And it has also the advantage in the case of a startup that they have just one player with whom they speak. They don't know actually all the people that are syndicated in this group, which of course serve the purpose of keeping the cap table clean, which is something very important. Yeah.
So what is the next step then? So basically, how does the movement from angel groups to venture capital, how does it work, especially early stage venture capital? I know that there is a little bit of, maybe both from the side of Swiss VCs, but also from the side of foreign VC, which I know that there is some dynamics over there.
Yeah. So as John also was saying previously, Switzerland does very good in early stage financing because there are a lot of business angels, but it doesn't go the same for later stage, in the sense that there are, of course, some local VCs that invest locally, but oftentimes they're also focused on more mature markets, such as the US, for instance, or Israel. So it's not a given that Swiss VCs would only invest in Switzerland. Oftentimes, it's not only their focus to do so. But at the same time, it's not rare to see the process going the other way around. So having foreign VCs that invest in Switzerland, and again, as I was mentioning before with Italy, I had also in practice, from my experience at law firm, several cases of Italian VCs investing in Switzerland, in Swiss startups. So there is definitely potential there that he is taking advantage of, and yeah, that's about it, I would say.
Fantastic. I was reading also like some opinion where columnists were mentioning how there is this gap, exactly as you say. Early stage is kind of covered, late stage is kind of covered also from US investors that come into Switzerland, especially on later rounds. But the mid phase, basically that's where European VCs are kind of playing right now, just to lift up the early stage investments up to sort of a US investor style level. So there was this whole dynamic. So locally, startup have been born and raised, and then the European kind of grow it, and then the US intervene with the big guns. So that's a very interesting dynamics there for sure.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about Corona.
Also because maybe just quickly to develop on this topic, valuations in Switzerland also, due to the cost of living here, are not so cheap as compared to other countries. So which is why on the one hand they are still attractive to foreign investors because of their high quality, but then, as you said, when high investments are required, oftentimes is from the US, because there is where you have the more liquidity on the market, at least when it comes to VC.
Yeah, fantastic. Let's talk about how the pandemic has been affecting the ecosystem in the past 2 years. What are the different dynamics, how they changed, how the government has intervened, and what is the status right now?
Yeah, so I think there was no negative impact overall for the Swiss ecosystem from the pandemics, in the sense that two of the main focus of Swiss startups are digitalization on the one hand and life science on the other hand. And these two verticals both benefited from the pandemics, because when it comes to digitalization, this was accelerated definitely, as we all experienced, by the COVID-19 crisis. And same goes with for life science. I mean, not all the projects that were successful in these 2 years were COVID related, but still the pandemics really brought a spotlight on this whole sector and really boosted it up. So that's why also Basel, for instance, the region of Basel performed so well in the last 2 years, because there is where most of the life sciences startups are concentrated, and they gained a lot of traction these past few years.
Awesome. So let's talk now about where are the biggest opportunities for early stage investors. So as an investor coming from Italy and looking into the ecosystem, which verticals do you guys feel they should first start looking into? And where are you feeling like there are the most openings?
Yeah, and probably life science, as mentioned already, is one of the strong fields in Switzerland, also for its history in this field. And then all that is focused on deep tech. Again, so it's a lot of engineering, it's ICT, but as John was saying at the beginning, more in B2B businesses, not so much B2C businesses, just e-commerce and stuff like that. Also because Switzerland has basically no internal market. I mean, it's a very small market. It's fragmented in 3 different national languages. So in that respect, it doesn't have an asset to play, but it's more into B2B.
Got it. All right, Umberto, thank you so much to you and Gian. It was a very insightful conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, pleasure hosting this, and hope to have you another time on the show.
Definitely. Thanks a lot for having us tonight, and all the best for future sessions.
All right, thank you.